So as you're no doubt aware, hopefully from a recent video of mine, Democrats won big in yesterday's off-year elections, and one of the biggest wins was in Kentucky, one of the reddest states in the country. Incumbent Democratic Governor Andy Beshear won a second term against a Republican challenger who was, shaped in large part by Mitch McConnell and endorsed openly and consistently by Donald Trump. And despite that, the Democrat won. And I want to explore the relationship between Trump's endorsement and, Andy Beshear's campaign and why I think he won and why he thinks he won. But before we unpack all of that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. We have several clips to play. But before I play any of them, I just want to contextualize this. It was a big win yesterday. But I want to be clear, it wasn't really an upset. If you glance at Kentucky, and it is one of the reddest states in the country, it has a Republican supermajority, you would think that a Democrat stands no chance whatsoever in Kentucky in terms of the gubernatorial race. And yet, Kentucky's history is actually pretty rich in terms of electing Democratic governors. And Andy Beshear has enormous name recognition. His father was a two-term Democratic governor. He was the attorney general before he became governor in 2019, et cetera and so forth. And yes, in aggregate, the polls did predict it. I want to be very clear about this. It's not something that defied the polls. Most polling indicated that Beshear would have an edge. But if you look at the, the qualities of his right-wing Republican opponent, Daniel Cameron, who is young, who was mentored by Mitch McConnell, the most infamous politician ever produced by Kentucky, as well as Donald Trump. He had Donald Trump's endorsement. He was a fervent supporter of Donald Trump. In theory, on paper, that should have gone to Cameron, but it didn't. And so now we get to the first clip. I want to remind you all, this is the latest video endorsement of Daniel Cameron by Donald Trump. It happened a couple of days before the election. Just keep this in mind with where we go next.
Daniel Cameron is a young star who has done a great job as your Attorney General, always being fair but very, very tough. And the wonderful people of Kentucky know it. You've learned it, you've seen it, you've been watching it. He is strong, reliable, and loves your state and our nation. Daniel is a tremendous fighter on crime, lowering taxes, saving our Second Amendment, stopping inflation, and, of course, helping our great military and our vets. We love our vets. Daniel strongly supports law enforcement and is endorsed by the Kentucky Fraternal Order of Police, will not allow men to participate in women's sports, fully supports our teachers and getting our children caught up from the massive learning loss caused from Beshear's educational policies, which have been a disaster for Kentucky. He will eliminate Kentucky's income tax and will support the working men and women of Kentucky, just like I did for 4 great years. His opponent, current Governor Andy Beshear, has been a disaster for Kentucky. He endorsed crooked Joe Biden, which in itself is about as bad as it gets, whose economic policies are crushing your state, including inflation and energy, which are at an all-time high. Beshear is weak on crime and the Second Amendment. He's not doing the protection that it needs. They want to get rid of the Second Amendment. The Democrats are fighting hard to do that, and Beshear wants to help him. He also wants to raise your taxes and viciously shut down churches, small businesses, and schools. And you saw him do that very recently. 4 more years would be a disaster for Kentucky. So I have known and worked with Daniel Cameron for a long time, and he's good on every common sense policy there is. He's a common sense person. He will never let you down, and he has my complete and total endorsement.
Very sterling words, Donnie. I mean, just very unambiguous. And by the way, this is what Daniel Cameron said when he won the Republican primary before they went into the general. Take note of what Daniel Cameron has to say.
Home that made this win a reality. And of course, a big thank you to President Donald J. Trump for his support and his endorsement of this campaign. Let me just say, the Trump culture of winning is alive and well in Kentucky.
Hilarious. I mean, you just could not tee up a more ironic outcome because, of course, Daniel Cameron lost. Daniel Cameron was endorsed by Trump in the primary, endorsed by Trump in the general, and he lost against Andy Beshear. And this is now what Donald Trump has to say. Daniel Cameron lost because he couldn't alleviate the stench of Mitch McConnell. I told him early that's a big burden to overcome. McConnell and Romney are kryptonite for Republican candidates. I moved him up 25 points, but the McConnell relationship was too much to bear. Tate Reeves, on the other hand, surged to win in governor of Mississippi after my involvement. Congratulations to Tate. So you see how Donald Trump is. Just an absolute malignant narcissist, just like a comic book villain. He talks a big game and endorses his subordinates, and then the moment they are inconvenient to him or they are no longer of any use or they in any way impact him in a way that he finds negative, he just discards them and then rewrites history, right? So I want to play this clip from Chris Christie, who commented on Daniel Cameron's defeat and, tries to draw the connection between Daniel Cameron's defeat and Trump's endorsement.
Also tonight, in a very red state, the state of Kentucky, the Democratic incumbent, he beat a rising star in your party, Daniel Cameron. Cameron was also notably endorsed by Trump. He was embraced by him and embraced Trump himself. Was that a mistake on his part?
Daniel Cameron was a rising star in the Republican Party until he decided to throw his lot in with Donald Trump. I mean, let's face it, Donald Trump is political and electoral poison down ballot. Down ballot, his endorsement has led to Republican defeats in the House, in the Senate rather, and the House in 18. In 20, we lost the United States Senate and the White House. In 22, we underperformed miserably. And tonight, you're seeing us lose again. Daniel Cameron made a huge mistake by embracing Donald Trump and selling his soul to him. That's what he did. And the voters of Kentucky, very red state, as you noted, gave their verdict on politicians who sell their soul to Donald Trump.
It's a great point. I mean, in terms of Chris Christie, the comments about Trump being electoral poison down ballot, it's absolutely the case. I mean, Trump's endorsements characteristically underperform. The endorsements of Trump that do well are like incumbent Republicans that he endorses at the last second, right? So it's like the sure thing, the sure bet, the one that's probabilistically going to win. And then Trump's like, oh yeah, I endorse them. Then if and when they win, then he takes all the credit for it, right? But when he deviates, when he tries to use his own judgment, his own discernment, those endorsees consistently underperform. So there's a good case to be made there. Now, in terms of Governor Beshear, and again, I used to live in Kentucky, big fan of Andy Beshear. He is the most popular governor in the United States. It's truly remarkable. As a matter of fact, many people have suggested that this, especially after winning a second term in Kentucky and being only 45 years old, he's very young, that he could have a bright future ahead of him in national politics, that he could eventually pursue a presidential run. Just a compassionate, empathetic guy, hamstrung in large part by, again, a Republican supermajority, right? So his vetoes are, very susceptible to being, overridden by the Kentucky General Assembly. But in terms of how Beshear won his campaign, and we're going to hear from him in just a second because he's already provided comments on this, I want you to see what may have been the most hard-hitting campaign ad on any political campaign ad in the United States this year. I think this is a contender. I think this campaign ad can compete with anything that came out of President Biden's re-elect campaign so far. Watch, and we'll discuss it.
I was raped by my stepfather after years of sexual abuse. I was 12. Anyone who believes there should be no exceptions for rape and incest could never understand what it's like to stand in my shoes. This is to you, Daniel Cameron. To tell a 12-year-old girl she must have the baby of her stepfather who raped her is unthinkable. I'm speaking out because women and girls need to have options. Daniel Cameron would give us none.
Short, concise, powerful. I mean, this got national coverage. This was a subject of many of the debates and commentary about the gubernatorial race between Cameron and Governor Beshear. So abortion, even in red states like Kentucky and Kansas, Ohio we saw last night, Virginia, right? Strict pro-life, they call it pro-life, I call it pro-forced birth. Pro-forced birth is not popular in this country, even in red states. And it was an anchor around Daniel Cameron's neck, politically speaking. Now, This is what Governor Beshear had to say. We're going to play 2 clips from him in terms of why he thinks he won and the kind of blueprint he wants to offer for people who are Democratic or liberal or progressive running in red states.
Governor, when you hear people say that your reelection and the way you ran your campaign provides a blueprint for how Democrats should be running elsewhere and across the country, do you agree?
Well, I think our blueprint was as simple as show up, work hard, get results, and care about everybody. And don't get distracted by whatever the issue of the day is in Washington, D.C. When people wake up in the morning, they don't think about President Biden or President Trump. They think about, do they have a good enough job? Can they afford to take their kids or their parents to a doctor when they're sick? Do they feel safe in their community? Are their kids getting the best education? Is the road they drive on to work safe? Does it need repairs? Those are the things that impact everybody's daily lives. And I hope that not just Democrats, but Republicans and independents go there. Enough of trying to demonize groups of people, of driving a wedge between people, of the attacks and the anger. How about we all talk about how to improve people's lives, and then the electorate can decide who has the better plan or the better ideas or who they trust more to move.
Well said. And again, having met Governor Beshear, having campaigned for him when he ran for Attorney General, I mean, this is who he is. Like, he gives off this like kind of dorky dad energy. He's very friendly. He's very empathetic. Just a remarkable guy. And what's funny is, again, the most popular governor in the country in a deeply red state. Even Republicans who despise most Democrats and people that I know personally, many of them will either openly say that they like Beshear or that they dislike him the least. I mean, this guy just has a way about him. But now the question becomes, what about Joe Biden? What about President Biden? We saw in recent polling, President Biden, there is aggregate polling to indicate that President Biden is underperforming relative to Donald Trump, despite all odds, right? Despite all, credulity. Doesn't make any sense in the world, but that's where we are right now. And this is what Andy Beshear has to say about that in terms of his campaign, his election, and President Biden and Democrats on a national level.
Looking at the politics, looking at the map, looking at the poll numbers ahead in 2024, do you think you won, Governor, because you have Joe Biden in the White House right now, or in spite of Biden being in the White House right now, when he's struggling in polling in battleground states?
Well, my opponent certainly tried to make this race about Joe Biden, and it didn't work. These races, especially governor's races, are so state-centered and specific because your job is to get things done. In Washington, D.C., they seem to think that the signing in the Rose Garden is the end. It's not even the beginning, right? Even the bipartisan infrastructure law, which is so important, so critical. It's helping us build the Brent Spence Corridor Bridge. That's between Cincinnati and northern Kentucky, one of the biggest infrastructure projects in history.
The number of years I've heard about that one. Yeah.
It was great. One pile of dirt. And so it's I believe that my opponent's attempts to nationalize this race backfired because he wasn't talking about what he wanted to do as governor. And so anytime that you try to bring in those wedge issues or try to make it about something else, you're missing your chance to actually talk to voters about what you would do.
That was something that Governor Beshear hit Cameron on again and again and again and again and again every chance he could. He made it. He's like, I'm keeping a tally. How many times you mentioned Joe Biden? You mentioned Joe Biden this number of times, this number of times, this number of times. You don't talk about me. You don't talk about what you want to do, which is the most important thing if you're trying to make the case. So, yeah, I don't know if we can look at Kentucky as a bit of a bellwether. It's not like Kentucky is necessarily emblematic of the rest of the country. But here is an important piece of trivia, and this is what we'll close on. Kentucky gubernatorial races for the past 20 years have been predictive of the subsequent presidential election. Because, again, gubernatorial races in Kentucky occur in the off year, right? The presidential election occurs the year after. So in 2003, Republicans won the governorship in Kentucky. And then the next year, President Bush won re-election. In 2007, Democrats won the governor's mansion. And then in 2008, President Obama was elected. Same thing in 2012. Then in 2015, Matt Bevin won the governor's mansion, a Republican. And the next year, Donald Trump won the presidency. Governor Beshear wins in 2019. And then in 2020, President Biden wins. So again, pure coincidence, potentially. Maybe there's a political scientist out there who can draw the data to make the case that there's a reason that this is predictive. But I mean, if I were a superstitious person, at the bare minimum, if I were President Biden and I were superstitious at all, I'd be like, yeah, go Andy. And maybe that will put a smile on his face, for the next several days or whatever. Let me know what you think in the comments section. I love this. This is great for Kentucky. And let me know what you think about Andy Beshear's future in the Democratic Party after he leaves the governor's mansion in 4 years.